Hi, and welcome to Love on the Planet's special series on sun sign compatibility. And Margaret, we're starting with Aries because it's the first sign of the zodiac and because you're an Aries.
Absolutely, and it's the best sign ever, of course.
It's okay.
Okay, so we're starting with Aries, and we're really kind of looking at what works well between the signs and what some of the challenges might be. So, let's start with Aries Well, it's there's a lot of fun with two Aries together, so that's a really good thing. However, just to keep in mind that there can also be some competition.
Yeah, I mean, it's Aries squared, isn't it? And, Aries like to go their own way and do their own thing. And, there's a little bit of independence with Aries. And, if you're on track together, it can be really great. And when you have divergence, there can be a little bit of a strain. I haven't seen a lot of Aries romantic relationships, to tell you the truth. I've seen a lot of friendships, though. And I think that there's a little bit of stress sometimes, although generally speaking, there's a lot of compatibility there.
I was going to say that I think as friendships, personally, I've had a lot of friendships with other Aries and it's a lot of fun. I think, one of the things about two signs together, the same sign together, is that we kind of inspire each other. So I think all signs, it's really good to have at least one friend who's the same sign because they ignite the fire under that energy. But in a romantic relationship, it's a little too close and a little too similar. It's kind of good to have some difference, I think. So,
Well, you can't get much more different than Aries and Taurus.
what do you think about that combination, Armand?
Well, we're talking from the perspective of Aries. We'll talk about from the perspective of Taurus when we talk about that as the sun sign in
Absolutely.
another video. From the perspective of Aries, I think that Taurus can be grounding. It can help you to enjoy the moment. I think can be great for uh, getting you to sort of stop and smell the roses. On the other hand, it can be a very slow moving energy for Aries, and that can lead to a little bit of frustration.
Yes, I think if Aries can kind of slow down a little bit and be patient, I think Taurus really does offer that stability, which I think sometimes then Aries can go and have its adventures, but it kind of also enjoys coming home to that solidness and stability.
Aries and Gemini. Well, Gemini, there's two of them anyway, right? So
Yes, absolutely. And I think I again my over the years as I've worked with couples, I've seen that work well as a combination for friendships more than necessarily for relationships because there's really that excitement and the air and fire element together. They're both pretty dynamic. But I think sometimes it's almost as if they can go in their separate directions. So coming together romantically doesn't always work. It's almost like they're both so engaged with other things that there isn't a sense of coming home to each other.
very possibly, very possibly. I think also too, it can be a very intellectual type of energy. It fires up Aries. Aries, with any of the air signs, Aries is going to get a little bit of a charge from that energy. But on the other hand, Aries wants to move on that, and Gemini is, pretty willing to just sort of stop and consider things for a while. Now, what about Aries with the sign of Cancer?
That's a really interesting combination because they are so very different, those energies, where Aries is focused on the future constantly and on action, and Cancer is much more, of course, focused on the past and tradition and a kind of, really security, holding things in. It's like, the crab in the shell. I think they're very different, but again, I think it's a little bit similar to Aries and Taurus, that it can work well if they can both allow each other to do their own thing. From the perspective of Aries, if Aries can enjoy the kind of sense of nurturing that Cancer can offer and the sense of real, just love that Cancer can offer, that it isn't in a hurry to dash off everywhere the way Aries is, then it can work really well. But there may be a little bit of a sense at times of feeling frustrated, maybe hemmed in, maybe just being restricted a little bit at times by the Cancerian energy.
Aries and Leo.
Well, I think you'll have to address that first, Armand, as a Leo.
Well, it could work.
And be careful here. Be careful.
It could work. I think that two fire signs together are going to really appreciate the inspiration, the sense of enthusiasm that fire brings. On the other hand, Aries can be a little headstrong, and Leo can be a little imperial, and it can be a little tough. Egos can get in the way. There's a different flavor of ego, but they can get in the way. I think the important thing is to focus on having as sort of having a destination, as it were, having a shared project, a sense of moving forward with things.
Yes, I think the great thing about Aries and Leo is that they're both action oriented, forward goal oriented. So I agree with you. It's a little bit, and there's a childlike quality about both signs. And so they can play well together. Of course, when they don't play well, there are problems. But usually, my experience with Aries and Leo is that things can get resolved pretty easily because they're both kind of fire and pretty direct in how they deal with things. So usually things can get resolved. And certainly in terms of friendships, I think it works really well. And of course, business
Yeah.
colleague relationships works perfectly. And where we all
Virgo,
were.
Virgo.
Virgo, thank you, of course. Quiet, humble Virgo. That's kind of interesting because, of course, Aries is so, dynamic, fiery, and Virgo is much more practical. Um, wants to do things methodically. So, and of course, we're looking at these just in the pure sun sign rather than the aspect. So, I think there can be a few challenges for Aries. I think, although Aries may be attracted to the Virgo way of being much more organized in doing things, but I think Aries may feel eventually that, all the lists and all the rules and regulations may be a little bit too much for it. So it really needs to, it depends how comfortable it is or how much Virgo, of course, the sun in Virgo, sun in Aries has to deal with the Virgoan precision. Also, Virgo is much more shy. That's a big difference.
Well, I think there's a reserve about the two signs that they have in common. It's a different kind of reserve. Virgo really sort of puts that step back type of thing. Aries is a little bit more like I'm doing my thing. It's an independence, but it leads to a little bit of reserve, and I think that there's a little bit of resonance with that. There's a lot of respect, I think, between the two signs. A lot of people would say that Aries and Virgo don't get along, but I don't find that to be the case at all. In fact, there's another sign where I've seen a lot of friendships that are Aries, Virgo, and they tend to be quite long lasting. And I think it is because there tends to be a sort of mutual respect of, you do your thing, I do mine, and we don't necessarily need to agree on every point.
And then, of course, Aries and Libra. And Libra is the opposite to Aries. And of course, when we look at signs that are opposite each other, we're talking about both need to learn something from each other and both have some characteristics. And I think that Aries and Libra is a very interesting combination because, Aries is the first sign and it's about me and how do I forge ahead and, break new ground. And yet Libra is about, let's always think about what's going on with the other person. So I think together they can be quite powerful because Libra can help balance out and Aries can help give some kind of umph and courage to the Libra. Again, I've seen it more with friendships than I've seen it with relationships. It doesn't mean it can't work, but that's just in my experience.
I have seen a number of relationships that are Aries
Okay.
Libra, and I think that there's a degree of stress that shows up just where you'd think, and yet on the other hand, I mean, we talk sometimes about how opposite signs are kind of the shadow of each other, and how there's always a little kernel of the opposite sign within each sign, and it helps to develop that. I think that it can be quite helpful to consciously develop for Aries to recognize well, what is the role of relationship in my life, and then there's the Libra there to sort of show you.
So Aries and Scorpio, that's a very interesting one because of course the ruler of Aries, Mars, is also the modern ruler at least is connected to Scorpio as well. So I think there is actually quite a connection between those two signs. And I think that Aries really respects the depth that Scorpio goes to. But more than that, I think Aries really respects the honesty of Scorpio. That, there's an Aries loves honesty and justice and fairness. And so Scorpio brings that to a whole new depth, as well as, of course, the intensity and, the adventure that Aries can go on with Scorpio. I think one of the maybe challenges at times might be that sometimes Aries wants to play a little more and maybe not always go into that underworld unless it's got Scorpio in its chart. So it may at times feel pulled down a little bit. What do you think, Armand?
I think the emotionality of Scorpio was a bit of a challenge for Aries. Not that Aries are unemotional, but they don't need necessarily everything to be on an emotional level all the time. And that's where that Scorpio is sort of the opposite, is going to be dealing with things on an emotional level all the time.
So what do you think about Aries and Sag?
Well, on paper, it should be a very easy combination. They're both fire signs. It's Jupiter's sign. We would imagine things would go really, really well, and I think that they often do. Maybe things get beyond themselves sometimes, though, with this combination. It's a very hot combination, and I think that there's a lot of potential for passion and excitement and adventure. That adventure that you were talking about is really something that is quite prominent with an Aries Sagittarius. On the other hand, sometimes you need to slow down so you don't burn out.
And also, one of the things I think between Aries and Sagittarius that they have in common is this desire for intellectual pursuit. People always see Aries as kind of, or often see Aries as, oh, they're the sports people. Well, actually, it's quite an intellectual sign, and so is Sagittarius. So I think if they have interest in common, that can be really stimulating. Whether it works as a romantic relationship depends on lots of other things. Again, I think it's a great friendship combination that can work really well.
Aries and Capricorn.
Oh goodness, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Again, I think like the other earth signs, it can ground the Aries. And however, I think the issue with Aries with earth signs, especially in a romantic relationship, is where does the grounding end and then the restrictions start? So I think it depends. And also that the Capricorn can be so involved in its projects and its things, which the Aries is as well, but it may be that there's a lack of fun. So I think it would be very important for this combination to really make sure that fun is scheduled. And I think that would work well.
I think so. It's another one of those where I'd say that it's very goal oriented. It would be good to have a focus. Aries and Aquarius.
What do you think about this combination, Armand?
Well, you seem skeptical, but I think that I think that Aries and Aquarius, there could be a little bit of detachment, could be a little bit of a problem for Aries. But what I really think is that Aries tends to feel that it is right, and Aquarius tends to feel that it is right. And the question then becomes, or do we agree about things? Because if we disagree, we're going to probably disagree very strongly.
But incredibly powerful together to pursue an ideal. So this would be an amazing combination if there was something, to change, like in politics, or something that has an ideal at stake, or to work for, some kind of organization where you want to do some great things in the world. Very powerful
In personal
combination.
life, though, in personal life, very much a shared vision. A shared vision.
Yes,
This is what we want it to be, and we have to be very explicit about it.
crucial.
Pisces.
Well, that's kind of an interesting one because I have seen quite a few Aries Pisces combinations in various ways, and I think that can work really well because there's, there's a spiritual connection that can happen between the first and the last sign because it's like, the circle ends and starts in the same place. So I think it can be incredibly powerful, in fact. I think sometimes the Aries may get a little impatient, maybe with the dreamy quality of Pisces. But on the other hand, I think the Pisces, it really lends something very romantic to the Aries brashness at times.
It's a combination that I think can work very well. As with any of the combinations, they can work very well romantically, at business, friendships. but it requires a little bit of work, and it requires a little bit of a lot of bit of consciousness.
And that's really what we see, don't we? I mean, when people come to us before, just at the start of a relationship and they ask us, and that's, the sun is one of the many things that we look at in the charts.
All right, next time we're on to Taurus.
Absolutely.